Eleanor Vance found the drawer by accident. At least, that was what she told herself in the first 3 seconds before her hand began to shake. She was still wearing her wedding dress, the silk skirt gathered in one fist so it would not drag across the wooden floor of the small room above the garage. The room smelled faintly of engine oil, rain, and clean soap. Nothing about it looked dangerous. The bed was narrow. The lamp was old. The walls were bare except for one framed photograph of a deserted road cutting through winter trees. It was the kind of room a poor mechanic would sleep in after 12 hours under the hood of someone else's car. That was what Eleanor had been told he was, a poor mechanic. A man with rough hands, a silent mouth, and nothing to offer except the humiliation of becoming his wife. She had waited until he stepped outside to take a phone call. Then she had searched for car keys. She told herself she only needed 10 minutes, one road, one taxi, one chance to disappear before morning. She opened the top drawer of the desk and found old receipts. She opened the second and found a folded flannel shirt. She opened the third drawer expecting keys, cash, maybe a cheap watch. Instead, Eleanor stopped breathing. Inside the drawer lay 12 black cards, arranged in a perfect row on dark velvet, each one heavier and cleaner than anything that belonged in that room. Matte black, sharp-edged, embossed with private seals she had only seen beside names her father whispered when business news came on. One card carried the name Adrian Cross. Another carried no name at all, only a silver symbol and a number. Eleanor reached for one, then pulled her hand back as if it might burn her. Poor men did not hide cards like this. Poor men did not keep secrets in velvet-lined drawers. Poor men did not receive phone calls at midnight in a voice calm enough to frighten the person listening. And only 1 hour after the wedding, Eleanor Vance realized the poor mechanic she had been forced to marry was not poor at all. 7 days earlier, Eleanor had still believed ruin came loudly. She thought a family collapsed with shouting, breaking glass, men at the door, neighbors watching from behind curtains. But the Vance family collapse began in silence, in the front room of a house that still looked beautiful from the street. The white columns were still polished. The roses were still trimmed. Her mother's portrait still hung above the fireplace, the same portrait guests used to praise when Eleanor was a child, and the Vance name still meant invitations, charity dinners, and velvet ropes opening without question. That evening, Eleanor came home from fashion school carrying a portfolio under one arm and a half-finished sketchbook in the other. She had spent the afternoon arguing with a professor about fabric movement and had worried, stupidly, that her final collection lacked courage. Then she opened the front door and saw her father sitting on the sofa with both hands folded between his knees, staring at the carpet like a man waiting for a sentence. 3 strangers stood around him, not sat, stood. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed. Guests sat in the Vance house. Friends laughed too loudly and asked for coffee. Business partners crossed their legs and pretended deals were friendly. These men did not pretend. Their coats were expensive, but not elegant. Their shoes were too clean for the rain outside. One of them, a narrow-faced man with silver hair and a gold ring on his smallest finger, turned when Eleanor entered, and his smile made the room feel colder. "Miss Vance," he said, as if he had been expecting her. Eleanor looked at her father. "Dad?" Martin Vance tried to stand, then seemed to forget how. He had always been a handsome man in public, with perfect cuffs and a voice that could make donors feel generous. Now his collar was open, his face gray, and his eyes would not meet hers. "Eleanor," he said softly, "go upstairs." The silver-haired man laughed once. "No, she should stay. This concerns her more than anyone." Eleanor did not move. She was 22 years old enough to understand danger, and young enough to still look first at her father for protection. But Martin Vance looked smaller than the men standing over him. That was when she understood the room had already changed hands before she walked into it. "Who are you?" she asked. The silver-haired man gave a shallow bow. "Vincent Calder. Your father and I have unfinished accounts." The name meant nothing to Eleanor, but it moved through her father like a blade. Martin closed his eyes. "Please," he whispered, "not in front of her." Calder ignored him. "Your father borrowed money he could not repay. Then he borrowed more to hide the first mistake. Then he used names he should not have used and promises he had no right to make." Eleanor tightened her grip on the portfolio until the cardboard bent. "How much?" Her father flinched. Calder's smile widened. "Enough that numbers stop sounding like numbers." One of the other men set a folder on the coffee table. Inside were copies of signatures, property liens, photographs of warehouses, bank notices, private documents Eleanor recognized by the Vance crest at the top. It was not one debt. It was a web. Her father had not fallen once. He had been sinking for years while keeping the house lit, the roses cut, and Eleanor's tuition paid. "There has to be a legal way to handle this," Eleanor said, but her voice sounded thin even to herself. Calder looked around the room, amused by the word legal. "There was. He passed it months ago." Martin finally looked up at her, and the shame in his face hurt worse than the stranger's. "I was trying to save the company," he said. "I thought I could turn it around before you ever knew." Eleanor wanted to be angry. She wanted the clean relief of blaming him. But he looked like a man who had already punished himself every night and still woken up owing more. "What do you want?" she asked Calder. Calder tapped the folder with one finger. "A settlement. We have nothing left. Not nothing." His eyes moved over her in a way that made Eleanor's skin tighten. "You have a name, a daughter, a public image your father is very eager not to see dragged through court, papers, auctions, and scandal." Martin stood too quickly. "No!" One of the men placed a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down without effort. Calder's voice remained gentle. "Within 7 days, Eleanor Vance will marry the man we choose. Your father's immediate debt will be absorbed. His public disgrace will be delayed. Refuse, and by next week every donor, every bank, every school, every friend who ever smiled at this family will know exactly what Martin Vance signed and who he signed it with." For a moment, Eleanor could not understand the words because they were too old-fashioned, too ugly, too impossible. "Marry the man we choose." It sounded like something from a century when daughters were traded across dining tables. She almost laughed, but there was no air for it. "You can't force me to marry anyone." Calder tilted his head. "Force is such a dramatic word. We are offering structure. You're offering a threat." "Yes," he said pleasantly. "That too." Eleanor looked at her father again, waiting for him to stand, to shout, to become the man who once told her no one in the world had the right to make her small. But Martin's hands were trembling. "I'll go to the police," Eleanor said. Calder's expression did not change. With what? A father who signed illegal guarantees? A family business with falsified statements? A trail of money that makes your father look less like a victim and more like a partner? He leaned closer. "You are young, Miss Vance, so I will be kind once. Men like your father do not get rescued by the truth. The truth is what buries them." Her portfolio slipped from her hand and hit the floor, sketches spilling across the carpet. One page opened near Calder's shoe, a design for a wedding gown she had drawn as an exercise, not a dream. He looked down at it and smiled. How fitting. Eleanor bent to gather the pages, but her fingers would not work. Her father whispered her name like an apology. "Who?" she asked. Calder pretended not to understand. "Who is the man?" Calder removed a photograph from the folder and placed it on top of her sketches. It showed a man standing outside an old garage, one shoulder against the open hood of a truck. He wore a faded flannel shirt, his hair was dark, his face was partly turned away, but even in the blurred photograph he looked calm, watchful, and completely unimpressed by whoever had taken the picture. "Adrian Cross," Calder said, 32, mechanic. "No family worth mentioning, no fortune, no friends who matter." Eleanor stared at the photo. She had expected a monster. That might have been easier. Adrian Cross looked ordinary in a way that felt deliberate. Poor, maybe. Tired, maybe. But not weak. "Why him?" she asked. Calder's smile thinned. "Because it amuses me." That was the moment Eleanor understood the cruelty was not only practical. It was designed. The Vance daughter, who had grown up in rooms where people complimented her posture and asked about Paris, would be married off to a garage mechanic from the industrial edge of the city. It was not enough to collect money. They wanted the final Vance pride bent until it cracked. The next morning, the house looked exactly the same, which made everything worse. Sunlight came through the tall windows. The roses outside opened as if nothing had happened. Eleanor sat at the dining table while her father stood by the sideboard and tried to explain what could not be explained. He told her about the first loan, then the second, then the men who came recommended by a friend of a friend when the bank refused to extend credit. He told her he had been sure he only needed 1/4 of recovery, one investor, one contract, one good season. The language sounded like business, but Eleanor heard the truth under it. He had gambled with time, and time had collected. "I can run," she said. "You can't," her father replied. "They'll find you." "Then we both run." "They'll find us faster." She hated how quickly he answered. She hated that he had already thought of every escape and found fear waiting at the end of each one. "So that's it?" she said. "You want me to marry a stranger because you made mistakes?" Martin gripped the back of a chair. "No, I want you to live." "Do you hear yourself?" Her voice broke. "You're talking about my life like it's already been signed away." He looked at her then, and for 1 second she saw the father from her childhood, the man who carried her on his shoulders through summer gardens and promised her mother he would protect their only daughter from every hard thing. "I failed you," he said. "There is no sentence after that big enough to fix it." Eleanor wanted to wound him.
She wanted to say, "Yes, you did." But the words stuck behind the memory of him teaching her how to knot a tie before her first scholarship interview because her mother was gone and he did not know how to braid hair, but still tried. Grief and anger folded together until she could not separate them. "What does he get out of it?" she asked, the mechanic. Martin shook his hand. "I don't know." "You didn't ask?"
Calder arranged it. He said Cross owed someone or wanted something cleared. I don't know if that's true. Eleanor looked toward the staircase, toward the room where her mother's jewelry box sat nearly empty because most of it had been sold months ago without her noticing. 7 days, she said. That's all I have? Her father's face collapsed. I'm sorry. Eleanor stood. Don't say that again unless it gives me back my choice. On the third day, Calder sent a car to take her to the old garage. Eleanor almost refused, but refusal had begun to feel decorative, like pushing against a locked door for the dignity of being seen pushing. She dressed carefully, not because she wanted to impress Adrian Cross, but because polish was the only armor she had left. Cream coat, dark dress, hair pinned cleanly. Her mother's pearl earrings, the last pair unsold. The car drove away from the clean avenues near the Vance house and into the industrial district, where buildings sat low and weather-stained under a gray sky. The garage stood at the end of a narrow street between a tire shop and a closed warehouse. Its sign was old. Its windows were clean. Inside, the air smelled of metal, rubber, and coffee. A radio played somewhere in the back, low enough to sound like memory. Adrian Cross was bent over the engine of a black sedan when she walked in. He did not look up immediately. He tightened something, wiped his hand on a cloth, then closed the hood with a soft, final sound. In person, he looked older than the photograph, but not worn down. 32, Calder had said. His flannel shirt was faded at the elbows. His hands were marked with small cuts and oil shadows that soap had not fully removed. But his eyes, when they met hers, were the opposite of rough. They were steady, too steady. Eleanor Vance, he said. Not a question. Adrian Cross. Her voice came out colder than she felt. He nodded once. No smile, no apology, no attempt to play the grateful groom. That irritated her more than it should have. Did they tell you to act humble? She asked. Or does it come naturally? A younger mechanic near the back looked up, alarmed. Adrian did not. He folded the cloth in his hand with unnecessary care. You have every reason to be angry. That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. Eleanor laughed once, sharp and humorless. Wonderful. A silent man. That will make the forced marriage very romantic. Something moved in his face then. Not anger, not amusement. Something almost like regret. This is not the marriage you think it is. She hated the line instantly. It was too calm, too prepared, too much like a man asking her to trust a locked room because he knew where the key was hidden. Do not do that, she said. Do not stand there in a garage and pretend this is some mystery I'm too emotional to understand. I understand enough. My father owes dangerous men money. They chose you because humiliating me entertains them. You agreed because there is something in it for you. Adrian's silence confirmed nothing and denied nothing. What did they offer you? She demanded. Debt forgiveness? Cash? Protection? Less than you think. That's convenient. Yes, he said. It is. Before Eleanor could answer, the office door opened, and one of Calder's men entered the garage. Not the silver-haired Calder himself, but the broad-shouldered one who had pushed her father back onto the sofa. His name, she had learned, was Miles Drayton. He walked in like he owned the place, touching a wrench on the counter, glancing at the cars, smirking at the oil stains on the floor. "Look at this," Drayton said. "The bride came to inspect the palace." Eleanor stiffened. Adrian turned his head slightly. "You're early." Drayton's smirk faltered for half a second, and Eleanor noticed it because Adrian's tone had not changed. It was not loud, it was not threatening, but it landed in the garage like a door locking. "Calder wants confirmation," Drayton said. "Wedding goes ahead Saturday. No delays, no moral crisis, no last-minute tears." He looked at Eleanor. "Though tears are allowed after the paperwork." Adrian stepped away from the car. "Tell Vincent Calder he'll get what was agreed." Drayton's eyes narrowed. "You say his name comfortably for a man who should be grateful he's being included at all." Adrian walked to the workbench and set down the folded cloth. "Miles Drayton," he said quietly, "the last time you confused inclusion with power, 3 men in Baltimore lost their accounts before sunrise." Drayton went still. The young mechanic in the back stopped moving. Eleanor looked from one man to the other. She did not know what the sentence meant, but Drayton did. Color rose under his collar. "Careful," he said. Adrian's gaze did not shift. "I am." Nothing else happened. No fight, no dramatic threat. But Drayton left sooner than he meant to. Eleanor heard the garage door close behind him and realized she had been holding her breath. Adrian picked up a clipboard as if the air had not changed. "You should go home," he said. Eleanor stared at him. "How did you know that?" "Know what?" "His full name." "Baltimore, whatever that was." Men like him repeat themselves. "That is not an answer either." Adrian looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something guarded behind the calm, something he had built walls around long before she entered his garage. "No," he said, "but it is the only one I can give you before Saturday." Eleanor should have felt reassured. Instead, she felt the first thin line of fear shift direction. Calder's men were dangerous. Her father was broken. The marriage was a trap. But Adrian Cross, the poor mechanic everyone expected her to pity or despise, knew things he should not know and stayed calm in rooms where other men measured exits. As the car took her back to the Vance house, Eleanor looked once through the rear window. Adrian stood outside the garage in his faded flannel, hands in his pockets, watching the street as if he had been waiting for this war long before her family stumbled into it. By Saturday morning, Eleanor Vance had learned that dread did not always make the world darker. Sometimes it made everything too bright. The white flowers on the church steps looked almost violent in the sun. The polished cars outside reflected sharp pieces of sky. Her wedding dress, delivered in a sealed garment bag by one of Calder's assistants, was beautiful in the cruelest possible way. Ivory silk, long sleeves, a narrow waist, a veil so soft it seemed designed by someone who understood exactly how to turn a sentence into a photograph. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror in her childhood bedroom, while a hired stylist pinned the veil into her hair and told her she looked timeless. Timeless. Eleanor wanted to laugh. There was nothing timeless about this. There was only a clock counting down to the moment she would walk into a church and become someone's wife because her father had borrowed from monsters. Downstairs, she could hear voices moving carefully through the house. Calder's people had arrived early. They did not shout. They did not need to. Their presence was enough to turn every hallway into a guarded corridor. Her father knocked once before entering. He wore a dark suit that hung looser on him than it used to. When he saw her, his face twisted with something too painful to name. "You look like your mother," he said. Eleanor looked at him through the mirror. "Don't." He stopped near the door. "I know I don't have the right." "Then don't use her today." He nodded, as if she had struck him, and he accepted it as deserved. For a moment neither of them spoke. Eleanor watched the stylist pretend not to listen. Her father's hands trembled at his sides. "There may still be a way after this," he said softly. "A lawyer, a private arrangement, time." Eleanor turned from the mirror. "You are still bargaining with time?" He closed his eyes. The words had found the wound because they were true. All his life, Martin Vance had believed one more week could save him. One more quarter. One more investor. One more lie held together until the next door opened. Now his daughter was dressed for the cost. A car horn sounded outside. The stylist stepped back. "They're ready." Eleanor lifted her chin. She would not let Calder's men see her cry. She would not give them that much. She walked past her father, then stopped at the threshold. "If I go through with this," she said, "it is not because I forgive you." His voice broke. "I know." "It is because I refuse to watch them bury you while you're still breathing." Then she went downstairs before she could weaken. The church was small, private, and chosen not for beauty but for control. There were no photographers from society magazines, no school friends, no relatives who might ask too many questions. Calder had filled the pews with the exact number of witnesses needed to make the marriage legal and humiliating. A few Vance cousins sat near the back, invited only because their whispers would travel through the right circles by Monday. 2 debt collectors stood by the side entrance. A clerk waited near the altar with papers. Eleanor understood every detail. This was not a wedding. It was theater. She was the lesson. Her father walked beside her down the aisle, but she could feel how much effort it took for him not to collapse inward. At the altar, Adrian Cross waited in a plain dark suit. It did not fit badly, exactly, but it did not belong to him the way his flannel had. His hair was combed back, his jaw was clean-shaven. Still, he looked like what everyone had been told he was, a mechanic dressed for a room that had already judged him. No watch, no cufflinks, no family seated proudly behind him, no best man. Just a quiet man with rough hands, standing beneath stained glass while people measured the distance between Eleanor's silk dress and his ordinary shoes. The whispers began before she reached him. "That's him?" someone murmured. "God, Calder really did it." Another voice, female and amused, said, "From fashion school to motor oil, that is a fall." Eleanor kept her eyes forward, but the words landed. They were meant to. Adrian heard them too. She knew he heard because his eyes shifted once toward the pews, not wounded, not embarrassed, only registering. That calm angered her. Why did he not react? Why did he stand there as if humiliation were weather? When she reached the altar, her father placed her hand near Adrian's, but did not quite join them. Adrian noticed. After the smallest pause, he offered his hand palm up, giving Eleanor the choice to take it or leave it, visible to everyone. She hated him for that, too. for giving her a choice too late and too small to matter. She placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. The priest began. Eleanor heard almost none of it. She heard Calder breathing somewhere behind her. She heard silk moving when the cousins leaned closer to whisper. She heard her father swallow when the vows came. Adrian's voice was low and even. He said only the required words. No flourish, no false tenderness, no claim disguised as romance. Eleanor expected him to squeeze her hand, to perform ownership for the men who arranged this. He did not. When it was her turn, her mouth felt numb. She said the words because the room had been built to make refusal impossible. When the priest pronounced them married, Adrian leaned in, only close enough to touch his lips lightly to her cheek, not her mouth. It lasted less than a second. It was not affection. It was restraint. The reception was held in the back room of an old private restaurant where the chandeliers were dusty and the windows had been covered with heavy curtains. Calder liked rooms without witnesses. There was a long table, too much wine, and food Eleanor could not swallow. She sat beside Adrian, her wedding dress arranged around her like evidence. Across from her, Calder raised a glass. "To unexpected unions," he said. Several people laughed. Eleanor stared at the untouched plate before her. Adrian did not lift his glass. Calder noticed. "Come now, Cross. A man in your position should celebrate. You have married into a family name you could never have approached honestly." Adrian's face remained blank. One of Eleanor's cousins, Lydia, who had once borrowed dresses from her and never returned them, leaned toward another guest with a stage whisper. "Family name? There is barely a family left." A man near the end of the table chuckled. "Maybe that's why she suits the mechanic. Damaged goods for damaged engines." Eleanor's fork tightened in her hand. Adrian's gaze moved to the man only once. The man looked away first, but recovered with a laugh, embarrassed by his own instinct. Calder enjoyed it. "No need to be sensitive," he said. "We are all friends now. Debt has a way of creating family." He looked at Eleanor. "Doesn't it?" She lifted her eyes. "If this room is family, Mr. Calder, I understand why people run from home." The laughter stopped for half a breath. Her father lowered his head. Calder's smile sharpened. "Careful, Mrs. Cross." The new name struck her harder than she expected. Mrs. Cross. It sounded like a door closing behind someone else. Adrian spoke then, quietly. "Do not call her that to make a point." The room changed. It was subtle, but Eleanor felt it. Calder turned slowly toward him. "Excuse me?" Adrian's hands rested on the table, relaxed. "You heard me." Calder smiled as if the mechanic had performed a trick. "Marriage has made you brave very quickly." "No," Adrian said. "It has made your manners worse." A few guests looked down at their plates. Miles Drayton, standing near the wall, shifted his weight. Eleanor remembered the garage, the name Baltimore, the way Drayton had gone still. For 1 second, Adrian's ordinary suit seemed less convincing. But then Calder laughed and the spell broke. "Listen to him. The groom has teeth." He raised his glass higher. "To Adrian Cross, a poor mechanic with a rich man's attitude." More laughter. "And to Eleanor Vance, who has learned that every family has a price." Eleanor felt heat behind her eyes. She would not cry, not there. Not in front of Lydia, not in front of Calder, not beside a husband she did not understand. Adrian said nothing else. He simply sat beside her and absorbed the insult as if he had chosen the timing of every word. That silence hurt her in a way she had not expected. If he was part of this, why defend her at all?
If he was not part of this, why let them continue? By the time Adrian drove her away, evening had thickened into rain. There was no decorated car, no cheering guests, no rice thrown on the steps. There was only Adrian's old truck parked behind the restaurant near the service entrance, as if the bride had to be removed discreetly with the trash. Eleanor climbed in without taking his offered hand. The cab smelled faintly of leather, coffee, and cold air. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The city slid past in wet streaks of light. Eleanor watched her reflection in the window. Pearl earrings, pale face, wedding veil folded in her lap like something dead. "Was it worth it?" she asked, finally. Adrian kept his eyes on the road. "No." "That was quick." "You asked a simple question." "No. I asked what you got for standing there while strangers laughed at both of us." His fingers shifted once on the steering wheel. "You think they were laughing at me?" "They were." "They were supposed to." Eleanor turned toward him. "What does that mean?" He did not answer. Rain tapped harder against the windshield. She laughed under her breath, exhausted and furious. Of course. Another silence. Another sentence that sounds like a locked drawer. At that, his jaw tightened almost invisibly. She did not know why the word drawer mattered. Not yet. "You can hate me if it helps," he said. "Do not make yourself noble." "I'm not." "Then make yourself clear." Adrian stopped at a red light. In the glow from the signal, his face looked carved from shadow. "Tonight, whatever you feel, stay inside the house." "Your house?" "Yes." "The palace above the garage?" "Yes." "And if I don't?" He looked at her then. "Then men who have been waiting for you to run will have an easier night." The light changed. He drove on. Eleanor's skin prickled. "Is that a threat?" "It is the opposite." "You keep saying things like that as if I should understand them." "No," he said. "I'm saying them because one day you may remember I tried." She hated the fear that moved through her then, because it was not fear of him. It was fear that he knew something real and terrible, and that her anger, however justified, might not be enough to survive it. Adrian's house sat above the garage, reached by a narrow staircase at the back of the building. Eleanor had expected neglect, but the space was clean and spare. A small kitchen, a worn sofa, a table with 2 chairs. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. No photographs except the framed road she had seen in the hook of her nightmare, though she had not lived that moment yet. No luxury, no sign of a second life. If Adrian Cross had secrets, he had not left them lying around for a bride to find. He opened the door and stepped aside. "You can take the bedroom," he said. Eleanor stood just inside, holding the skirt of her dress away from the floor. "How generous." "I'll sleep downstairs." "In the garage?" "There's a cot in the office." "How romantic." This was never going to be romantic. The honesty should have relieved her. Instead, it made the room feel colder. Adrian removed his suit jacket and hung it over the back of a chair. Beneath it, his white shirt showed the strength of his shoulders, the kind earned by labor or maintained for reasons she did not want to examine. He moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, filling a kettle, setting a mug near her without asking. "Tea?" he said. Do I look like I want tea?
No. You look like you haven't eaten since morning.
Observation is not kindness.
Sometimes it's the only safe version.
Eleanor looked at him sharply. Safe for whom?
His eyes met hers. Again that guarded wall. Again the sense that every answer had been weighed against consequences she could not see. For everyone, he said. She turned away before she could ask another question, and hate herself for needing the answer. The bedroom door stood half open. Inside were the narrow bed, the desk, the old lamp, the bare walls. A plain room for a plain man. A poor man. A man Calder had chosen because the insult would travel. She walked into the bedroom and closed the door between them. For 10 minutes, Eleanor did nothing. She stood in the center of the room, listening to the kettle click off in the kitchen. She heard Adrian move once, then the low murmur of his voice as he answered a phone call. The words were too muffled to understand, but the tone was different from how he had spoken to her. Still quiet, still controlled, but sharper, commanding. She stepped closer to the door. "No," Adrian said outside. A pause. "Not until they move first." Another pause, longer. "Because if Calder thinks he owns the board, he'll bring everyone close enough to name." Eleanor's breath slowed. Board. Move. Name. It could have meant anything. Business, debt, crime, a game, a war. Then Adrian said, "The cards stay locked unless I say otherwise." Eleanor froze. Cards. Her eyes moved toward the desk before she knew why. The call ended. Footsteps crossed the room outside, then descended the stairs. A door closed below. Silence spread through the apartment. Eleanor looked at the bedroom window, then the desk, then the door. "Stay inside the house," he had said. "Men who have been waiting for you to run will have an easier night." Maybe it was manipulation. Maybe every man in this story had discovered fear was the simplest leash. She moved to the window and looked down. The alley behind the garage was wet and empty except for Adrian's truck. The street beyond was dim. If she found the keys, she could drive until the city thinned, sell the pearl earrings, call an old school friend, become someone no one expected. The plan was foolish. It was also the only plan that belonged to her. She went to Adrian's jacket first. No keys. Only a wallet with little cash, a driver's license, and a photograph folded behind it. She did not open the photograph. She told herself she was not that kind of person, though apparently she was the kind who searched a stranger's pockets on her wedding night. She checked the kitchen hooks, the bowl near the door, the top of the bookcase. Nothing. Then she returned to the bedroom, heart pounding, and opens the desk. The first drawer held receipts from the garage, neatly organized by date. The second held a folded flannel shirt and a small box of spare buttons. The third stuck for half a second when she pulled it, as if the wood had swollen in the rain. She tugged harder. It opened. Eleanor stopped breathing. The drawer was not full of keys. It was lined with black velvet, so out of place in the plain room that for a second her mind rejected it. On the velvet lay 12 cards in a perfect row. Not credit cards like the ones her father used to hide in his desk when bills arrived. These looked heavier, darker, almost ceremonial. Matte black, each edge polished, each surface marked with silver or gunmetal embossing. One bore the name Adrian Cross. Another bore only the initials A.C. and a symbol Eleanor recognized from a private bank her father once called a door ordinary money could not open. A third had a number but no name. Several were marked with entities she had heard mentioned in financial scandals, acquisitions, and whispered family conversations that stopped when she entered the room. Her hand hovered over them. She remembered the line from Adrian's call, "The cards stay locked unless I say otherwise." But they were not locked now. They were in front of her, and the room no longer looked poor. It looked staged. The old lamp, the narrow bed, the blank walls, the ordinary jacket, the truck downstairs, suddenly all of it felt less like poverty and more like camouflage. Eleanor picked up the card with Adrian's name. It was cold and heavier than it should have been. The private seal caught the lamplight. She turned it over. On the back was a number. No bank logo, no customer service line, no ordinary instructions. Just a sequence and a small phrase etched so finely she had to tilt the card to read it. Identity confirmed by voice only. Her mouth went dry. "What are you?" she whispered. She should have put the card back. She should have closed the drawer, sat on the bed, and waited for the man she had married to explain the impossible life hidden under his ordinary one. Instead, Eleanor reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed the number. For 1 second, she almost ended the call before it connected. Then a tone sounded, and a woman answered. "Identity channel?" Eleanor went still. Not bank, not service. Identity channel. "Hello?" the woman said. Eleanor swallowed. "I may have called the wrong number." "That depends who is calling." The voice was calm, professional, and frighteningly alert. Eleanor looked at the card in her hand. "My name is Eleanor Vance." Silence. Not dead silence. A processed silence, as if the line itself had changed. "Mrs. Cross?" the woman said. Eleanor's knees weakened. "No, I mean, yes, legally, but I'm not. I don't know what this is. Are you safe?" The question cut through everything. It was not, "Who gave you this number?" It was not, "Why do you have that card?" It was, "Are you safe?" Eleanor looked toward the closed bedroom door. "I don't know." The woman's voice lowered. "Is Mr. Cross with you?" "No." "Where is he?" "Downstairs, I think. Or outside, I don't know." "Which card are you holding?" Eleanor looked at the embossed seal. "It has his name. Adrian Cross." Another pause. "Listen carefully, Mrs. Cross. That card should not be visible unless he has decided the shield is no longer necessary." "The shield?" "If you found it by accident, close the drawer now." Eleanor's fear sharpened into anger because everyone kept giving instructions without truth. "No, tell me what it is." "I am not authorized to disclose structure over an unsecured call." "Structure? Is this money?" "Among other things." "Is he rich?" The question sounded childish the moment she asked it, too small for the dread gathering in the room. The woman did not laugh. "Mrs. Cross, Wealth is the least dangerous part of what you found." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the card. "Who is my husband?" The woman exhaled softly, and for the first time her professional calm cracked. "If you are in possession of those cards,
then you are already inside a war you cannot see. A floorboard creaked outside the bedroom. Eleanor turned. The bedroom door opened. Adrian stood in the doorway, rein on his shoulders, his eyes going first to her face, then to the open drawer, then to the card in her hand. For the first time since she had met him, the calm broke. Not completely, not dramatically, but enough that Eleanor saw fear move through him like lightning behind glass. "End the call," he said. The woman on the line heard his voice. "Mr. Cross, do you require activation?" Adrian did not look away from Eleanor. "No." "Sir," "I said no." Eleanor lowered the phone but did not hang up. "Activation of what?" Adrian stepped into the room slowly,
as if one wrong movement might make her run. "Eleanor, put the card down."
"No."
"Please." The word startled her more than an order would have. "Do you know how many men said please to me this week while taking something from me?" she said. His face tightened. "I know."
"You know nothing."
"I know more than I wanted you to have to learn tonight."
"That is not an answer."
"No," he said quietly. "It isn't." The repeated phrase, the locked doors, the secrets layered under secrets, something in her snapped.
"Who are you?"
she demanded.
"Because you are not a poor mechanic. Poor mechanics do not keep 12 black cards in a drawer. Poor mechanics do not have private bankers calling them sir. Poor mechanics do not make debt collectors go pale by saying one name."
Adrian looked at the cards, and the expression on his face was not pride. It was grief. "I did lie," he said, "but not to make you small."
"Then why?"
"Well, to keep you alive long enough for the men who sold you to expose who they answer to." Eleanor stared at him, the card still in her hand, the phone still connected, the wedding dress still heavy around her legs. Outside, somewhere below the apartment, a car door closed. Then another. Adrian's eyes shifted toward the window. The private banker's voice came through the phone, suddenly urgent. "Mr. Cross." Adrian took one step toward Eleanor. "Now," he said, voice low. "Close the drawer." "Why?" He looked at the black cards, then at the door, and this time he gave her the truth, or the first edge of it. "Because they're here." The sound below the apartment did not belong to the rain. Eleanor knew that before Adrian moved. Rain had rhythm. Rain softened the city and blurred the sharp edges of the garage windows. The sounds below were deliberate. Tires over wet gravel, doors shutting one after another, shoes finding the metal threshold of the workshop. Men had arrived with confidence, not quietly enough to hide, but not loudly enough to warn the street. Adrian crossed the room and took the phone from Eleanor's hand, not roughly, not gently either, simply with the speed of someone removing a match from spilled fuel. "Hold the line," he said into it. The woman on the other end answered, "Security channel open." Eleanor stared at him. "Security channel?" Adrian slid the black card from her fingers and placed it back into the velvet-lined drawer. His hand covered the cards for half a second, as if the sight of them exposed more than money. Then he closed the drawer. "Stay behind me." Eleanor almost laughed because the order was absurd. She was still in a wedding dress. She had been threatened in her own home, traded at an altar, mocked at a table, and lied to by the man now asking her to stand behind him as if he had earned that place. "No," she said. Adrian looked at her once. There was no time for argument in his face, but there was something worse. Fear. And not for himself. "Eleanor."
From downstairs came a crash, not of something breaking, but of something being thrown aside. A tool cabinet, maybe. A voice followed, Miles Drayton's voice. "Cross! Bring down the bride before we come up and collect her." Eleanor felt the blood leave her face. Adrian did not flinch. He walked to the bedroom door and turned off the lamp, plunging the room into a gray half-darkness lit only by the window. "They were waiting for me to leave you alone," he said. "You did leave me alone." "For 6 minutes. Long enough for me to find out you're a liar." His jaw tightened,
But he accepted the blow. "Yes." Another voice rose from below, smoother, older, colder. Vincent Calder. "Do not make this dramatic, Adrian. Tonight has already been sentimental enough." The way he said Adrian's name changed the room. Not Cross, not mechanic. Adrian. Familiarity wrapped around contempt. Eleanor looked at Adrian. "He knows you." "He thinks he does." "Did he choose you for this marriage, or did you choose him?" For a second, something passed through Adrian's eyes that told her the question had cut close to the truth. "Both," he said. Then he opened the bedroom door. The apartment outside seemed smaller than before. The kettle still sat on the counter. The mug Adrian had made for her had gone cold. The ordinary details made the danger feel obscene. Adrian moved toward the stairs, and Eleanor followed despite his warning, gathering the front of her dress in both hands so she would not trip. Halfway down, she saw the garage below through the railing. Calder stood near the center of the workshop in his long, dark coat, dry despite the rain, as if someone else had held the umbrella. Miles Drayton stood beside him with 2 other men. The young mechanic from earlier was on his knees near the office door, one hand pressed to his bleeding mouth. Eleanor gasped. Adrian's shoulders changed. Not much, only enough that every line of him went still. Calder looked up and smiled. "There she is, the new Mrs. Cross. I hope the accommodations did not disappoint." Eleanor gripped the railing. "Leave him alone," she said, looking at the young mechanic. Calder gave her a pitying look. "Still giving orders in a house that does not belong to you. The Vance education was expensive, wasn't it?" Adrian descended the last steps. "He has nothing to do with this." Drayton laughed. "Everyone standing near you has something to do with this." Adrian looked at the young mechanic. "Tom, office, door locked, now." Tom struggled up, eyes wide, and limped toward the office. One of Calder's men moved to stop him. Adrian turned his head. "Touch him, and I start with your brother in Queens." The man froze. Calder's smile weakened at the edges. Eleanor saw it. Everyone saw it. The man stepped back. Tom disappeared into the office and locked the door. For the first time that night, Calder's amusement seemed forced. "You have collected a few names. How impressive." Adrian walked to the center of the garage, stopping between the men and the staircase where Eleanor stood. "Names are easy. Patterns are harder. You should have changed yours." Calder's face cooled. "Be careful. You keep saying that to people who already are." Drayton took a step forward. "You think because you embarrassed me once with some Baltimore story, I won't break your jaw in your own garage?" Adrian looked at him with almost clinical calm. "Baltimore was not a story. It was a transfer chain through 3 shell companies, followed by a warehouse fire that killed 2 men your employer never paid for. You were a courier then. You are still a courier now. The only difference is that your suits got better." Silence landed like a physical thing. Eleanor stood on the stairs, unable to move. She had heard men threaten each other before, or thought she had. This was different. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not posture. He named hidden things, and the hidden things made violent men pause. Calder's expression darkened. "You should not know that." "No," Adrian said. "I shouldn't." Calder glanced around the garage, at the old tools, the stained floor, the plain counter, and for the first time his eyes carried calculation instead of contempt. "So this is what you have been doing. Hiding under cars, collecting scraps of information, pretending grease makes you invisible." Adrian said nothing. Calder laughed softly. "My God, I thought cross was a rumor men invented when they lost money." Eleanor's heart began to pound differently. Cross was a rumor. The phrase pressed against everything she had seen, the cards, the private line, the fear in Drayton's face, the bankwoman calling him sir. Adrian took one step closer. "You arranged a forced marriage using a debt you no longer controlled." Calder's eyes flashed. "I controlled enough." "No. You controlled Martin Vance's fear. That is not the same thing." At the mention of her father, Eleanor came down the remaining steps before she thought better of it. "What did you do to him?" Calder looked past Adrian to her. "Your father is alive, if that is what you mean. For now." Adrian's voice cut in. "Do not speak to her." Calder's smile returned, thin and cruel. "There he is, the devoted husband. Does she know yet? How much of this little fairy tale have you told her? Did you tell her you bought the debt before the wedding? Did you tell her the marriage contract was never necessary after Thursday? Did you tell her you could have stopped the ceremony and chose not to?" Eleanor's breath caught. The garage seemed to tilt. Adrian did not look at her, and that told her Calder was not lying. "Is that true?" she asked. Adrian's silence answered first. Then he said, "Yes." The word hit harder because he did not decorate it. Eleanor took a step back. "You could have stopped it?" "I could have stopped that part." "That part?" Her voice broke. "I walked down an aisle while they laughed at me. My father gave me away like a debt document. You stood there and let me say vows I thought were a cage. And you could have stopped that part?" Pain crossed his face, but pain was not enough. "If I had moved openly before they came for you, Calder's backers would have disappeared." "So you used me?" "I used the situation." "That is what men say when they use women and want cleaner language." Calder chuckled. "She has spirit. I told you the Vance name still had some entertainment value." Adrian's head turned toward him. The look on his face made Calder stop smiling. "You don't get to enjoy this." Drayton reached into his coat. Adrian moved first, not toward Drayton's hand, but toward the workbench. His fingers closed around a small black remote or phone Eleanor had not noticed. He pressed once. Every light in the garage snapped on, flood bright, white, merciless. The office computer screens woke at the same time, and on them appeared images from security cameras, the alley, the front entrance, the street, Calder's cars, each license plate clear as glass. A red recording light blinked above the garage door. Adrian's voice remained level. "You came close enough." Calder looked at the cameras, then at Adrian. "Recording me proves nothing." "Recording you was never the proof. A new engine sounded outside, deeper than the others. Then another. Through the rain-streaked front windows, Eleanor saw black vehicles pull up one by one, too clean, too coordinated, too official to belong to Calder's men. Drayton turned toward the door. "Who the hell is that?" Adrian did not answer him. The garage entrance opened before anyone inside touched it. Two men in dark coats entered first, scanning the room with the controlled calm of trained security. Behind them came a woman in a charcoal suit carrying a slim folder and no umbrella. Rain jeweled her hair, but she did not seem to notice. Eleanor recognized her voice before she recognized anything else. The woman from the phone. The private banking officer, or whatever she truly was. She stepped into the garage, took in the scene, and then did something no one in that room expected.
She inclined her head to Adrian Cross. "Mr. Cross," she said, "per your instruction, channel remains contained. External counsel is standing by. Asset freeze is prepared. Law enforcement liaison is 2 minutes out." Eleanor stared at her. Calder stared too, but for a different reason. His face had gone very still. The woman turned to him with professional politeness. "Vincent Calder, Miles Drayton, for your sake, do not leave the premises." Drayton barked a laugh that sounded more like panic than amusement. "For our sake? Who are you?" The woman opened the folder. "Naomi Vale, Senior Director of Private Risk at Halden Crown Reserve." The name meant nothing to Eleanor, but it meant something to Calder. She saw it in the slight movement of his throat. Naomi continued, "Mr. Cross controls 12 active black-tier instruments under our protection, including debt acquisition vehicles connected to Vance Holdings, Calder Recovery Group,
and 3 offshore entities you believed were untraceable." The garage was silent, except for rain and the hum of lights. Eleanor looked at Adrian. 12 active instruments, 12 cards. Not luxury. Leverage, access, proof. Power arranged in velvet because power did not need to glitter. Calder recovered first, but not fully. "This is theater." "No," Naomi said. "The theater was the wedding. This is accounting." One of the security men handed her a tablet. She glanced at it. "The Vance family debt was purchased 48 hours ago by a protected trust and removed from your collection authority. Any attempt to coerce Eleanor Vance after that transfer constitutes extortion, unlawful confinement, and conspiracy. We have recordings, documents, and your arrival here tonight." Eleanor's pulse roared in her ears. She heard the words, but one phrase stayed louder than the rest. Purchased 48 hours ago. 48 hours. Before the wedding. Before the vows. Before the reception where Calder toasted her humiliation. She looked at Adrian, and this time he did meet her eyes. There was no defense in his face, only the knowledge that truth could save someone's body and still wound their heart. Calder's mask, Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. The relief almost broke her more than the fear had. Adrian's expression softened for half a second, then shut again. Drayton looked toward the side exit. One of the security men blocked it without a word. In the distance, sirens began, faint but growing. Calder heard them too. The elegant cruelty drained from his face, leaving something older and uglier. "You were supposed to stay buried," he said to Adrian. Adrian's voice dropped. "You were supposed to stop selling daughters to cover debts." Calder lunged, not far, not successfully. The security men moved at once, efficient and almost silent. Drayton shouted. One of the other men cursed. Metal cuffs appeared, chairs scraped. The entire violent machinery that had crushed Eleanor's family for months folded in less than 30 seconds under a different kind of force. No gunfire, no dramatic speech, just documents, cameras, names, and people who recognized authority when it finally entered the room.
Eleanor watched Calder restrained beside the very workbench where Adrian had folded his cloth days earlier. Calder looked at her as they pulled him toward the entrance.
"You think this makes you free?" he spat. "You're still married to a man who lied better than I did." The words struck because they were not entirely false. Adrian took one step, but Eleanor lifted a hand. He stopped. She looked at Calder herself. "Maybe," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "But you were the last man who will ever decide what my fear is worth." Calder's face twisted. Then the security men took him out into the rain. When the garage emptied, it did not feel safe immediately. Safety, Eleanor realized, was not the absence of danger. It was the moment after danger, when the body had not yet learned to stop bracing. The lights still burned too bright. The drawer upstairs was still closed around its impossible secret. The young mechanic, Tom, emerged from the office with a swollen lip and eyes full of questions he was too loyal to ask. Naomi spoke quietly to Adrian near the front of the garage, handing him documents, asking for instructions, using words like custody, disclosure, reserve, and trust. He answered with the same calm he had shown since the beginning, but now Eleanor heard it differently. Not poverty, not emptiness, discipline. A man who had trained himself to appear smaller than his enemy's suspicion. She stood near the staircase, still in the wedding dress, feeling suddenly foolish and exhausted and furious all over again. Adrian dismissed the security team to the perimeter, then walked toward her. He stopped several feet away, as if distance was the only apology he trusted himself to offer. "Your father is safe," he said. "A car can take you to him now." Eleanor folded her arms to hide the trembling in her hands. "And the marriage?" He looked down once, then back at her. "If you want it annulled, it will be. Quietly, quickly. No debt attached, no pressure. Your tuition will be covered through an independent fund, not mine directly, if that matters. Your father will have counsel. Calder's claims are finished." She stared at him. "You have a solution ready for everything." "Not everything." "For me, apparently." "No," he said. "If I had a solution for you, you would not be standing here looking at me like that." The honesty cut through some of her anger, which made her angrier. "Why did you let me marry you?" Adrian breathed in slowly. "Because Calder was not the highest threat." "Then who was?" "The people behind him. The people he wanted to impress. The people who knew your father's debt was bait and waited to see who would reach for it." Eleanor searched his face. "Bait for you?" He nodded. "Years ago, I helped dismantle a network that hid money through failing family companies. Vance Holdings was touched by one of their old roots. Your father did not understand who he was borrowing near. Calder did. Or thought he did." "And me?" Her voice dropped. "What was I in that calculation?" Adrian flinched almost imperceptibly. "The part I could not leave on the board." "That still sounds like a calculation." "It was, at first." The rain softened against the roof. He continued carefully, like every word had weight.
Then I read the file on you. Not the society version, the real one. Scholarship applications after your mother died. Design grants you refused because the sponsors wanted your name more than your work. Hospital bills you never told your father you knew about.
You were not a socialite Calder could embarrass. You were a person everyone around you kept turning into currency. Eleanor's throat tightened. So you decided to buy me back?
No. His answer came faster than any before it. I bought the debt. I never bought you.
But you let me think you did.
Yes. The word stood between them, unforgivable and clean.
Because if Calder believed you were still trapped, he would come close. If he believed I was only a poor mechanic grateful for the arrangement, he would bring Drayton, documents, threats, leverage. I needed him to act, not vanish.
You needed me scared.
Adrian's face changed. That one hurt him. No, I needed him certain. Your fear was the cost I kept telling myself I could repair after. Eleanor looked away. The worst part was that she believed him. Not because he deserved it, but because his guilt had no performance in it. He was not asking to be forgiven. He was giving her the shape of the damage and letting her name it. Upstairs, the apartment felt different when they returned. The same narrow bed, the same old lamp, the same desk. But now every plain object seemed chosen, every absence intentional. Eleanor stood in the doorway while Adrian opened the drawer again. The 12 black cards lay exactly where she had found them, neat and silent. He did not touch them at first. "They are not all credit cards," he said. "Some are access instruments. Some are identity keys. Some are tied to trusts and emergency channels. The world calls them black cards because that is easier than admitting money has doors most people never see." Eleanor stepped closer despite herself. "And you have 12. 12 active fronts. 12 ways to move faster than men like Calder expect. 12 targets if the wrong people know where to look." "So why keep them in a drawer above a garage?" "Because no one looking for power searches a poor mechanic's bedroom until it is too late." Eleanor thought of the reception, the laughter, the phrase, "poor mechanic with a rich man's attitude." She thought of Adrian sitting beside her, silent while the insults stacked up. "You let them mock you because it protected the disguise." "Yes." "And me?" He closed the drawer gently. "I let them mock me. I should never have let them mock you." The answer was too simple to argue with. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly too tired to stand. Adrian remained by the desk. "When Calder first proposed the marriage," he said, "he thought he was humiliating two people at once, your family and me. He believed I was still an old debtor with no reach. I agreed because refusing would have made him suspicious, and because saying yes put me close enough to stop what came next." "What came next?" "They planned to take you out of the country within weeks, not as a wife, as leverage. Against your father first, against me once they realized I had touched the debt." Eleanor went cold. Adrian's voice stayed controlled, but his hands closed once at his sides. "That is the part I did not know how to tell you without sounding like the kind of man who invents monsters to keep a woman indoors." She looked at him then. The memory returned. Stay inside the house. Men who have been waiting for you to run will have an easier night. She had thought it was control. Maybe it had been warning.
Maybe it had been both, because secrets had a way of making even protection feel like a cage. "You should have told me something," she said. "Yes." "Before the wedding." "Yes." "Before I stood there thinking my life was over." His eyes lowered. "Yes." Eleanor waited for him to explain, to soften it, to say he had no choice. He did not. That silence was the first one she did not hate.
Near dawn, Naomi's car took Eleanor to the Vance house. Adrian did not sit beside her. He arranged the escort, handed Naomi the documents, and told Eleanor he would stay at the garage unless she asked otherwise. That mattered, though she was not ready to let it. The Vance house looked smaller when she returned. The columns were still white, the roses still wet from rain, but the spell of old importance had broken. Her father was in the front room, wrapped in a blanket, though the room was warm. When he saw Eleanor in the wedding dress, he tried to stand and almost fell. She reached him before anyone else could. For a moment she was a child again, holding on to the only parent she had left. Then she was 22, exhausted, married, betrayed, protected, and angrier than grief could erase. "I'm safe," she said first, because his face needed those words more than anything. Martin sobbed once into his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know you told me not to say it, but I am."
I am so sorry. Eleanor sat beside him. "The debt is gone." He looked up confused. "What?" "Or moved, bought, legally buried. I don't understand all of it yet." "By who?" She looked toward the window, where dawn had begun to turn the glass pale. "My husband." The word felt strange, but not as poisonous as it had the night before. Martin closed his eyes. "Cross." "You knew he wasn't just a mechanic?" "No. But I knew Calder was afraid of something when he said his name. I was too ashamed to ask why." Eleanor wanted to be furious again, and she was, but sitting in the ruined room with her ruined father, she felt something heavier than fury, the knowledge that fear had made everyone smaller, and that she was tired of rooms ruled by it. "I need the truth from you now," she said. "All of it. No more 1 more week, no more almost fixed, no more protecting me by lying until the lie becomes my life." Martin nodded through tears. "Yes." She believed he meant it.
She did not yet know if meaning it was enough. By the time Eleanor returned to the garage, the sun had risen fully. She had changed out of the wedding dress into a simple black coat Naomi had brought, but she still carried the veil folded in a bag because she did not know what else to do with it. Adrian was outside, sleeves rolled, helping Tom replace the tool cabinet Calder's men had knocked aside. It was almost absurd. After black cards, security convoys, frozen accounts, and men dragged into the rain, Adrian Cross was sweeping broken glass from his own garage floor. He looked up when she entered, but he did not approach. The choice sat between them again. Real this time. "Your father?" he asked. "Alive," she said. "Ashamed. Ready to talk. Maybe that's a start." Adrian nodded. "Good." Naomi's documents lay on the counter in a neat stack. Annulment options, protective orders, debt transfers, everything he had promised. Eleanor rested her hand on the papers. "You meant it?" she asked. "Yes." "I can walk away?" "Yes." "With my father protected?" "Yes." "And you won't stop me?" Adrian looked at her as if the question itself hurt.
Eleanor, the whole point was that they do not get to own your choice. I do not either. She studied him. The poor mechanic had been a lie. The powerless groom had been a lie. The ordinary drawer had been a lie. But this, she thought, might not be. "I don't forgive you," she said. He accepted it with a small nod. "I know." "I don't trust you." "You shouldn't. Not yet." That answer made something in her chest loosen, because it was the first time a man in this story had not asked her to move faster than her own truth. She looked toward the stairs, toward the room where the drawer waited. "But I want to understand what happened to my life." Adrian's voice was quiet. "Then I'll tell you. All of it. In order. And when you're done listening, you can still leave." Eleanor picked up the top document, then set it down again. Outside,
A tow truck passed slowly on the wet street. Inside, the garage smelled of oil and rain and coffee, the same as before. But nothing was the same. She thought of the girl she had been 1 week ago, worrying that her fashion collection lacked courage. She almost smiled at the cruelty of it. Courage had arrived, wearing a wedding dress she never wanted, holding a black card she never should have found, standing across from a man who had lied to protect her and hurt her in the same breath. "Start with the cards," she said. Adrian opened the drawer one last time and placed the 12 black cards on the desk between them, not as trophies, not as temptation, but as evidence. Eleanor looked at them until they stopped looking like wealth and started looking like the map of a war she had survived without knowing its name. She picked up the card marked Adrian Cross, then placed it back among the others. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes," he answered. She looked at him then. Really looked. Past the flannel, past the silence, past the disguise he had worn so long it had almost become a second skin. "And now you will."
"Yes."
Eleanor turned toward the open garage door. Morning light spilled across the floor where Calder had stood hours earlier, certain he owned her future. He had been wrong. Her father had been wrong. Maybe Adrian had been wrong too, in ways that would take time to name. But for the first time in 7 days, the next step belonged to her. She did not know whether she would remain Eleanor Cross, return to Eleanor Vance, or become someone neither name could contain. She only knew the truth had finally come out of the drawer. And the truth was this: he didn't hide his wealth from her. He hid it from his enemies.